Hello and welcome to another edition of the Pocket and Ocho Show. He's Pocket Silverman, born and raised in LA, living in New York City. I'm Alan the Ocho Goldberg, born and raised in New York, living on the West Coast. We are the Pocket and Ocho Show, and together we make up
It's the Pocket and Ocho podcast show.
I'm saying it more than once today. We're reminding the audience who we are.
They need to know what they're listening to. They could get upset.
That's right. We're here to tell innovative, informative stories, give some inspiration to people. That's what we do here at the Pocket and Ocho podcast. Our hashtag is 2 idiots, 1 podcast. But today we have a guy joining us who is far from an idiot. One of the smartest people I know. And by the way, we are amazed at the smart people willing to come on the Pocket and Ocho podcast. We've had a rocket engineer, and today we have Ezra Frazer joining us. Ezra Frazer is a biblical scholar and rabbi who recently completed basic training to become a chaplain in the U.S. Airforce during coronavirus times. Crazy enough to become a chaplain in the Air Force in normal times, but doing it now, I can't even express the appreciation I have for people making that sacrifice. Welcome to the program today, Ezra.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to reconnect with an old high school buddy, elementary school buddy as well.
I'm very excited. Sorry. Ocho, I'll let you lead.
Sure. So we're going to start at the very beginning of this story. As you're a rabbi who teaches at a Jewish day school, Ezra?
Yes.
Currently?
I currently teach in a high school known as the Abraham Joshua Heschel High School in New York. I live in Teaneck, New Jersey. So in my day job and my family life, I'm very much a part of what's really one of the most vibrant Jewish communities anywhere. Teaneck, New Jersey is this very large Jewish community. Manhattan, of course, in New York City is kind of the center of diaspora Jewry. And so, in my day job right now, I'm very much a part of a very vibrant Jewish community. And as you know, I've been a part of a vibrant Jewish community for a long time. I grew up going to the same Jewish day schools that you grew up going to.
Yes.
But that's
so you
not
grew
enough.
up in a Jewish environment. You work in a Jewish environment. And you decide to go to Alabama for basic training. So where for those of us who don't know, there are an overabundance of Jews. So we'll get to that. When did you decide that becoming a chaplain in the Air Force was something that would interest you?
So it's interesting. If you would have asked me like a few years ago, do I think this would ever happen? I would have been like, no. It's a cool thing to do, but I don't see myself doing it. And I slowly started to change my attitude towards that a couple of years ago. I started settling into being a teacher as my long-term profession. There's this period where I was trying to finish my PhD and not sure, am I gonna want to be a professor or a high school teacher? And it didn't really matter in terms of how I'd spend my summers. Either way, I'd have summers off from teaching, but I had this dissertation to write. And my big summer activity would be working on my dissertation.
Sure.
And then I reached a point where I finished that. And the way things played out, I felt, the direction I was going to be headed in was going to be a high school teacher. And now suddenly as a teacher, you're working really hard 10 months a year. But you have these couple of months in the summer that are available to you. And I started thinking of different things I could do sort of as a summer job. And I'll admit, Air Force is not a typical summer job. First you think a little more, okay, maybe get a job in a camp or teach an adult ed program. But I think the same mindset that I had for doing a PhD, you have to be very thorough in the way you research things. I wanted to look into everything, make sure I don't leave any stone unturned. And I vaguely remember 1 or 2 people I'd crossed paths with, either in YU, Yeshiva University, where I'd done my rabbinical ordination, or in jobs that had mentioned at some point that they were in the Army Reserves in that case. And so I said, you know what, let me look into that. I went online first, started reading up just to learn different branches. What does the Navy have, the Air Force, the Army? I mean, I couldn't have told you at that point why it matters if you're an Army chaplain versus an Air Force chaplain. But
So
reading up a bit.
So now you know there is a difference between being a chaplain in different branches of the military, per se?
Yes, yes. And so, like reading about this in this very general way and understanding that the thing about having reserves is it, or reserve to be precise, the Air Force Reserve or Army Reserve provide you with an opportunity to have like a second job outside of your civilian job. In my case, year-round job. That's really, let's say, a 10-month-a-year job, and you can do that so you can serve without having to completely give up the life that you have for yourself until now, as
Right.
opposed to if you went active duty, where your life then revolves around your military service and you have to move with your family every time you go to a new base. And so I said, okay, you know what? Let me learn more. So the way it works if you're a chaplain, which I didn't know until I looked into this, is that the military can't decide if the yeshiva where I studied to be a rabbi is a good yeshiva or not. How do they know if I'm really legitimate? From some guy who found a buddy who's ordained and told my buddy to ordain me, So, I mean, Ocho, like, I won't name any names, but we have some old buddies who got ordained under, programs whose accreditation was somewhat questionable, let's just say.
Hearing about this, I'm a little amazed. Anybody gets approved by the Air Force, knowing some of the shadiness.
Right. So so what they do, they have something called ecclesiastical endorsers. That basically means a body for any given religious group that the military trusts. Usually, the rabbis or priests or ministers at the head of it will be people who themselves maybe are retired chaplains or serve as reservists, and they become the endorser that tells the military, you can trust us as the military diocese that this priest is a legitimate Catholic priest. And for Jews, there's something called the Jewish Welfare Board. They have representatives from each of the major denominations. So I called them up. I said, I want to learn more about this. They asked me where I went to rabbinical school. I said Yeshiva University. They concluded that, okay, I'm Orthodox, so they'll have their Orthodox representative eventually vet me. But the guy says, oh, Yeshiva University, do you know so-and-so and so-and-so? And he names one or two names. And one of them, I'm like, oh, I know, I'm not really in touch with him anymore. What's he up to? And they say, well, he lives in Teaneck, New Jersey. Where do you live? Like, I live in Teaneck, New Jersey. There's a very big Jewish community.
So you're playing Jewish geography with the U.S. Air Force.
This is still the endorser. I mean, the endorsing agency, the rabbi I spoke to there, his name is Rabbi Irv Elson. He is a retired Navy chaplain, and so he is connected to the military, but right now he's working as a civilian, vouching for rabbis that they can be referred to the military and endorsed as a legitimate military chaplain. So he says, listen, there's this guy, he went to the same rabbinical school as you. You say you know him. He lives in your town. Get in touch with him. So I call him up, and turns out, if you know your Bergen County geography, there's an armory building in Teaneck near the border of Teaneck and Bergenfield, which I didn't know this until this phone call I made, but there is a New Jersey National Guard unit that trains there. And this friend of mine was the chaplain of that National Guard unit. So he's like, we don't have to talk on the phone. I can take you around the Teaneck Armory and you can really see what it's like. So we chatted for a while, and the more I spoke to people, the more it really appealed to me. One thing I had no idea about until then, I thought a chaplain, if you're a Jewish one, that means you're a rabbi for the Jews in the military. And that's only partially true. One of the roles of a chaplain is to guarantee religious freedom and ability to practice your religion in the military. You do it for everyone. So if you're in a small base where you're the only chaplain and there's a Muslim who needs halal food, you have to help the Muslim find halal food also. But of course, if there is a Jew there, especially if there are multiple chaplains on the base, so the Jewish chaplain will be the one who'll say whether it really is true there's a holiday the day that guy wants off, or if he just made it up. He thought people would believe there's another Jewish holiday then.
The Festival of Booths is a real thing. I tell you, it exists.
Yeah, so you have that role, and if there are Jews there who want Shabbat services, anything like that, you'll provide that. But obviously, most of the military is not Jewish, and you have this whole other role of what we call spiritual resiliency. Think of it as part of being associated with a larger mental health team, you have psychologists, social workers. You're not any of those. You can't provide that type of therapy. You can't prescribe any mental health medications, anything like that. But part of what people sometimes need to get through stress can be what religion has to offer in the formal sense, right? Sometimes if you're going through a stressful time and you're away from home as a Jew, a nice Shabbat meal might be part of what you need to feel like you reconnected emotionally with home, you know?
Sure.
And even if it's not your exact faith, sometimes that role that a clergyman can play of, putting a smile on your face, listening to you patiently can be helpful. The way we set it up in the military, think of, there's that funny scene in Seinfeld where Jerry Seinfeld goes to confessional.
Yeah.
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 So, and like, he thinks, part of what's the thing that's funny is he's Jewish and the guy's a priest, right? But it's also funny because he knows if he's in confessional, the priest can't share anything he says, right?
Yes.
He's like clowning around and like the priest can't share it. So that's how confessional works for them. You could tell a priest literally, I'm going to shoot so-and-so tonight, and the priest is not going to rat you out. So the military has chaplains operate that way.
Okay.
For me, it's like hard to accept when I first heard that, because as a rabbi, like you have a concept of lashon hara, right? We don't gossip about people and share their private stuff in general. But if somebody's life were at stake,
right. If unfortunately somebody was dealing with a stress overload, it's like I may go crazy or do something dangerous, you would want to be able to inform people in certain situations.
Right. And remember, I'm a teacher, so in a school setting, if I hear that God forbid, a student of mine is getting abused, I could get fired for not reporting that, right?
That's very true. It's a complete contrary.
It's the opposite. Like they're doing this calculation that having somebody on the base that anyone serving there knows, I can tell whatever I want to, and it won't get back to my commander. It's part of like the overall toolkit the military needs to keep people okay emotionally and mentally.
Right.
And so someone can come to you and say, I was raped by someone, or I committed the rape, or I committed a murder, and whatever it is.
Yeah, I feel like two of those are not like the other. Yeah.
Unless they put it in writing, right? They can give you written permission to share it. Without that, you can't share it. Wow. And the hope is, look, there are other people they can speak to who will share it. But if someone's in a situation where they're not going to tell anyone, right? Imagine the fear someone might have. They're going to take my weapon away. They're going to decide I'm not fit to serve anymore. So maybe the person really isn't fit to serve. But right now, the biggest concern is they want to kill themselves. And maybe at least because there's someone they can talk to who's not going to get them kicked out, maybe you can at least convince them not to do it today. And then there's time for prevention between now and the next time they have a thought like that. So, that
try to talk up the base psychologist, be like, you should really talk to this person.
But again, I can't tell the psychologist that person spoke to me. I could tell the guy I think I should go to the psychologist.
Right. Yes, that's what I was trying to get.
But
hypothetically speaking, could you go to a psychologist? I think you should talk to it would be a good idea to talk to this person, or
you're very restricted in what you can share.
Okay.
Again, they've done this calculation, which sounds like a horrible deal to make, but think of overall policy that even if here and there we might, God forbid, lose someone, where you're going to always think, if only I would have called the police or called the psychologist, maybe whatever, but enough other people will be saved because they stepped forward and spoke to someone, and you were the first step in getting them on track. Maybe you did convince them to get more help later. That overall, they make that calculation. So that's basically religion neutral. It could still be that if you're on a base where there's a Jew, the Jew might prefer to seek out a rabbi for that. But in principle, someone could be a complete atheist, and you're still there to provide that kind of
morals.
We call it counseling, but it's not the same thing as the counseling the psychologist provides. It's essentially listening, offering encouragement, and you do a lot along with that to boost morale. My roommate, when I was in officer training school, had deployed a couple of times. He was saying, when you're deployed, people love the chaplains because they're the ones putting on the movie night and all the stuff to keep people in a upbeat mood in a stressful situation in, Afghanistan or Iraq. So you have this role where it's, as a rabbi, you don't see yourself necessarily as the one who's organizing movie nights, but it's a very important part of what you do.
No, that's not what I would envision. So at this point, you've decided you're interested in learning more about becoming a chaplain in the Air Force. You've spoken to a rabbi chaplain. Have you mentioned to your family you're considering taking on this undertaking at this point?
I spoke to my wife about it from the outset. It's not a good idea if you want to have a healthy marriage to like join the military and then tell your spouse later. So, I spoke to her from the beginning. We both knew so little at the beginning that, she couldn't really be necessarily in favor or opposed. She just wanted me to get more information, right?
Right.
But I didn't tell a whole lot of people in my extended family until a little later on. I didn't want, say, either of my parents to maybe be nervous about it if in the end I'm not going to do it anyway, potentially, right?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
I didn't tell them until I basically made up my mind that I was going to be doing it. And then the process begins. This friend of mine who had taken me to see the Teaneck Armory, he says, the Jewish Welfare Board, JWB, the endorser, they have an annual conference that's in different parts of the country. That year, we're talking now like winter 2019, it happened to have been in New York. He's like, you teach in New York, just pop in for a couple of hours and you can like meet some people, shake hands with them, and speak to them for 5 minutes. And the ones that you think have insight to share, you can then follow up with a phone call later. And so I met.
That's lucky.
And like, yeah, it was, worked out nicely. And he said to me, you might want to think about Airforce also. Army and Air Force have good reputations for being relatively accommodating of the religious observances that an observant Jew would need. And the Air Force in particular has a program called Category B Reservist or IMA Reservist. Everything's acronyms. IMA stands for Individual Mobilization Augmentee. You don't need to know that. But basically, the standard reservist that you're used to, if you hear about somebody serving in the whatever reserve, Army, Navy, Air Force, or for that matter, the National Guard or Air National Guard, is that you're in a unit of reservists, which gets together to drill, we call it, like to train 1 weekend a month. Then at some point during the year, they have 2 weeks where they do a longer drill, a longer training together. And they're essentially staying sharp with whatever skills they have, whatever thing their unit does, whether it's a air refueling unit or this type of combat system or cyber unit, whatever it is, staying sharp with that so that when they're needed to be activated, they're good to go. And we know since 9/11, it happens, these units will get mobilized and then sent for 6 months to the Middle East, Afghanistan, whatever.
Right.
That's like your standard reservist model. You could imagine for someone who keeps Shabbat, that could be challenging if 1 weekend a month, which means Saturday and Sunday, you're out there doing your drill exercises. It can be done. I know Orthodox rabbis who do that.
Right.
It means being away from your family from then. If you live in Teaneck and you're assigned to the Teaneck Armory, then you walk there. That's the best. Right? Even my friend who did that, every couple of years they change up your assignment. He's already at a different base now, right?
It's a convenient spot. The train stops, the bus stops there.
Yeah, it's a great place. Express bus. That's great. So, the Air Force has a second path you can take, which is what I ultimately did. And a lot of other Orthodox rabbis I know have gone this path, where you're a reservist assigned to an active duty base. So the base you're at is a base for people who are there. It's their 5-day-a-week job. Right, 5-day a week, but military. So plus, when you're needed, right? And there are going to be chaplains who serve there in active duty as well. But then each base, for whatever reason, might benefit from some people who are available as an extra pair of hands. And each base has its own needs. In my case, I'm assigned to the Air Force Academy. So there, for these cadets...
Sorry, is the Air Force Academy the one in Colorado Springs? Is that going to generally...
The one with the football team, right?
Yeah.
So,
the U.S. Olympic Training Center is also very close, so I've spent a lot of time in that part of Colorado.
Yeah, go Falcons. So, these cadets, when they come in out of high school, if they're going to start school in the fall, already in the summer, they're doing like the military training stuff. And that can be very stressful. I mean, to get in means you're a very impressive high school senior. And now you're thrown into this stressful environment that's much tougher than maybe anything you've been in until that point.
Sure.
So it's helpful to have like all hands on deck, especially anyone who's going to contribute to resiliency, support, emotional support. So
absolutely. Also, just from a human element, you go from being like the big shot on campus in high school to all of a sudden, quote unquote, being a peon in the Air Force, where you started rock bottom. It could be a culture shock for a high school,
Exactly. Like everyone there who got in, right? Picture the guy who gets a high school scholarship, out of high school gets a college scholarship to Division I because he was the best athlete in his high school. Now he's on a Division I team where everybody was the best athlete in their high school.
Yep.
Right. So like at the Air Force Academy, like everybody was that outstanding person from their school. So assuming nothing unforeseen comes up, like I'll be going to the Air Force Academy in late June or early July. And instead of doing a weekend here, weekend there, I'll block all my days together like that, right?
Okay.
Which is great because, first of all, I can live in New Jersey and serve in Colorado that way. Whereas if I were a standard traditional reservist, I'd have to be in a base near New Jersey, right? Because I'd be going there one weekend a month. Whereas here I can do one trip. And so, and in terms
also
of that,
from a hands-on perspective, it's kind of nice to be there 2 months and build a rapport with certain cadets and see them, a few weeks in a row.
Yeah, I mean, it's really more like 1 month that you're actually there, even a little bit less than that. So, the challenge is you're kind of like being a substitute teacher. You're there for like a little bit of time in a place where the place runs year round. And you want to hit the ground running when you get there. You don't want to be like the guy who's walking around like a deer in the headlights when you're supposed to be doing your job. But on the flip side, it allows you to have these like 2 lives, right? Like the month of your life where you're fully immersed and all of your undivided attention is on that. Then the other 11 months of your life where you're the Orthodox rabbi living in Teaneck, New Jersey, sending your kids to yeshiva and teaching, Jewish studies in a Jewish high school.
It's like a superhero by day.
Right, you put on that uniform and then the camouflage.
Yeah, nobody knows my secret.
So let me just ask you a question that a lot of listeners will be intrigued about. Yeah. Were you concerned about the physical aspect of joining the Air Force? Like, did you think you had to get into some kind of ridiculous physical conditioning or any of the sort?
Oh yeah. It's funny because people in some of the other, we mentioned before the different branches. So in general, not for chaplains, the Air Force tends to be the hardest branch to get into. There's a test called the ABSAT that you take to get into the military. The Air Force requires the highest scores. And so we think very highly of ourselves, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm a proud airman. The Army sometimes will look at us, the Marines for sure will look at us and say like, Air Force, call them the chair force. They're a bunch of couch potatoes. They sit around and
what?
We take exception to that. I mean, there are people in the Air Force, to be a pilot, you got to be in pretty good shape. To be one of the Air Force special operators, there are people in the Air Force who have to be in insanely good tip-top physical shape. And I will say, talking to someone who's served as a chaplain in both the Army and the Air Force, he says that when it comes to officer training schools that chaplains have to go through, the physical training in the Air Force is harder.
Ooh.
I'm not saying that'll be necessarily true of my service down the road, but they give you, it's all objective, right? You go on the Air Force website and it'll tell you how many sit-ups you have to do in a minute, how many push-ups you have to do in a minute. So I'm looking at these numbers and I'm over 40. So at least every 10 years it changes. At least I don't have to do like the 20-year-old ones. But I'm like, really? 21 push-ups in a minute? 34 sit-ups in a minute? Like, you got to be kidding me. No. Yeah, there's a mile and a half I can run. You may remember from our childhood, I was terrible at every sport except for distance running. So a mile and a half you have to run. Like, I was totally cool with that. But
just keep going.
I'm like, yeah.
Pocket. Can you imagine 34 sit-ups?
No.
In a day?
No.
In a day? In a whole day? Maybe a week?
No. Can you give me 2 days? I asked for 2 days.
Really, it's true that practice, like most things when I got to the training kind of went the way I thought they would. The academic stuff, it's a different type of test. I'm not used to multiple choice tests. That's not how you do your PhD. And they're tricky, they're not easy multiple choice. And, wasn't used to, the way you write a paper there, it's not meant to be long and thorough. It's meant to condense the ideas into bullets that you could present in a short briefing. Sure. So after writing like a dissertation that's 300 pages, I had to adjust to that. But I knew at the end of the day I'd get good grades in the academic part. Like if I couldn't do that, like I don't belong there, right? I have to return my degrees.
Right.
And like you have to march a lot. And you may recall, I'm not the most physically coordinated. I don't get hand-eye coordination or hand-foot coordination. I knew I'd be lousy at marching. I was lousy at marching. Okay. the thing that I most pleasantly surprised myself was I started practicing sit-ups and push-ups at home because I thought I wouldn't meet the bare minimum. They'll throw me out. And I practiced and I practiced. You know, you want to do it every day. I didn't always do it every single day, but I did it often enough. I got better. And when you get there, they test you twice. Normally, the first one is right after you get there. In our case, we have to wait 2 weeks because of coronavirus. But 2 weeks in that first test, if you do the minimum numbers I told you, you'll get like a 75 out of 100, which is the minimum to pass.
I'll get a hernia.
But I easily beat those. I got, well, high 20s of push-ups. I forget the exact number, but around 40 sit-ups. I ran a mile and a half.
Damn!
5 minutes. And I'm like, wow. And then your PT, they call it physical training. Basically, the morning, you wake up at 4:30 in officer training school. So
Okay, wait. Okay, now we got to get into the crux of this whole story because mind-blowing. Most people during coronavirus are feeling like heroes sitting on their couches and sleeping 14 hours a day.
Yeah.
Here you are waking up in insane hours, being in better shape almost than you were in high school. This is insanity.
The craziest part of it is like I didn't see that coming, right? So like it's a slow process. Spring of 2019 now, I finished, calling various old acquaintances plus new people I met at that chaplain conference. I must have had like 5 or 10 different phone calls with military chaplains, mostly Air Force ones. So once I thought the Air Force is going to be the one for me, I focused on that. I'm all like excited with the morale aspect of that. Of the Air Force does all the cyber stuff, and once upon a time I did a BA in computer science, so I knew that things have changed since my BA. I graduated in 2001. I knew I'm not about to hack anything on behalf of the Space Force or anything, but I figured I'm gonna connect with those people, right? If you're a chaplain, you want to connect with the people you're serving. So somebody with a computer science background, there'll be a lot of people I meet who are going to be like my kind of guy or gal, and so. Excited for that. The one kind of intense moment I had was last summer, right, July 2019, for the physical. Instead of having you just report for physical in the daytime, it was in Brooklyn and Fort Hamilton. The night before, you go to a hotel in Staten Island, so you can get woken up at 4:30 the next day and bust from there to Fort Hamilton. So you internalize the idea that you should get used to waking up really early and being told what to do.
Oh my
God. Okay, I did that. That was one day, and then back to my civilian life. In December of 2018, I took my oath, I swore in, and the schedule was supposed to be that sometime the next year you have to go to officer training school. There was a course offered starting June 9th. School ends around then. I figured, okay, maybe I'll miss a couple of days of teachers' meetings at the end. I'll be done with classes. And I'll do it in the same. And then coronavirus starts, right?
Right. So you hadn't even heard of coronavirus before when you started signing up. Coronavirus wasn't yet a thing.
Right, and some of the people who are encouraging me are saying, look, it's a great lifestyle for a teacher. You have your teaching career. If you're in this category B, IMA type reservist, you can schedule all your days for the summer. So you don't, basically, I wouldn't say it's a relaxed job because the military is intense when you're on, but it's a great, best way you could ever ask for to balance your family, your civilian job, and your military service. And it'll all be really smooth unless there's another catastrophe on par with 9/11, and then all bets are off.
So what was it like? Oh, man.
Well, the catastrophe happens. So again, I think I'm going to chaplain school in June. Not chaplain school, officer training school in June when the school year is done. As you may recall, Passover began on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Right? So an email goes out on Thursday that I read Saturday night because I observe Passover and the Sabbath, right?
Right.
Saturday night, I turn on my computer after 72 hours off the grid to see an email that went out on Thursday saying that the June 9th class has been moved to May 19th due to coronavirus. And if you have any problems with that, please respond within 24 hours. So,
I guess you didn't have any problems with it,
It wouldn't have mattered when I responded. The day it was moving, they weren't going to move it back because of a reservist, right? I mean, this is officer training school for active duty officers too. And
did you know training school was in Alabama? Did you know you'd be going to Alabama
Yes, and a Chabad rabbi who went there a couple years ago said to me, forget Sweet Home Alabama. If you go there in the summer, it's Sweat Home Alabama.
We need a new song. Sweat Home, not with me singing, but I gotta ask this. I mean, there's so much material here. It's just a wealth of fascinating information. Uh, is so you actually everybody's saying don't get on planes, and you're like, I gotta get on a plane to fly to Alabama, but I'm sure the military is not giving you a private
Right.
plane or anything.
You know, right? Like I'm thinking, I wish I could push this off to like June, but I'm gradually going through that change you have to go through if you're going to serve in the military, shifting away from like wanting this to fit nice and neat into your life to like our country is falling apart, the world's falling apart, and the military wants you now, and that you can't say it's not what I signed up for. It actually is what you signed up for, right?
Right.
You signed up for this thing that's going to fit really nicely with your schedule, with the caveat that when they really need you, even though it's your part-time job and your teaching job's your full-time job, but when that part-time job needs you, it basically supersedes everything.
Oh man.
So I'm sort of like coming to terms with this. And so I called, there's a lieutenant colonel chaplain who's involved in placing you in officer training school if you're a chaplain. And I'm saying to him, like, could it be like maybe gonna like just cancel this thing because of coronavirus?
And
like, he's
the rest of the world canceled.
It's mission critical. Like the military doesn't put you in harm's way for no reason. They're not trying to get people in danger. But if a mission needs something, they try to do it in the least risky way to their own men and women, but the mission has to get done. And he says, like, having officers in the Airforce is mission critical. Again, I got to get out of my bubble here. And he just said, point blank like that. And then as I'm processing it, I'm realizing like what he's getting at here. That like, and I understood it more once I got there. Right? There are people in my unit, my training unit, we call my flight, who were active duty, who the day after we graduated, which was a Friday, are like enjoying a couple of days a weekend and then reporting to their base Monday morning as an officer, right? So that base needs somebody to be the new head of whatever biolab that person's going to be running. And so you can't just be like, oh, coronavirus, we decided like we're not going to graduate any new officers. So it's mission critical. They asked you to do it in the safest way possible. So anyone who lives close enough that they could kind of like maybe drive, maybe fly, they were encouraging them to drive. But for me, I mean, from New Jersey to Alabama, the amount of hotels and rest stops I'd go to wouldn't have
Right, far more risky. Yeah.
I said, look, wear a mask, do whatever you can to be safe. As soon as we got there, they tested us for coronavirus with that awful one they shove up your nostrils.
So you flew from Newark to Birmingham, let's say, or?
No, here's the thing. I mean, you have appreciation for small airports, right?
Yeah.
The closest airport to this base in Montgomery is MGM. Montgomery.
Yes, I actually know of MGM.
Did you? Right. So I was supposed to fly there, but there are not exactly a whole lot of flights going there. So from Newark, you can't fly there direct. I was going to fly from actually LaGuardia to Charlotte.
Okay.
Charlotte's the regional hub, which does have flights to Montgomery. And then
so you're flying American Airlines. Sorry, airline nerd here.
And then a couple of days before, by the way, your flight's canceled. Right, that's coronavirus strikes again, right? I frantically call up. There are certain travel agencies the military works with, and I'm like, okay, how about I just fly into Birmingham? And I assume they'll like cover the cab, even though it's not going to be cheap from Birmingham to Montgomery. And they're like, well, there's a whole process because depending which airport you're going to, sometimes they're contracted with Delta, sometimes with American. Eventually it gets sorted out that once we looked at the facts together, the relevant powers that be agreed that Birmingham made the most sense. I flew LaGuardia to Charlotte to Birmingham.
Was the Charlotte to Birmingham leg completely empty, or were there a few people?
No, there were other people there. I mean, it was not full, but there were other people on the flight.
Okay.
And then from there, I took a cab for like an hour and a half, hour 40 minutes from Birmingham to Montgomery.
That's a long cab ride. I don't think I've ever taken an hour and a half cab ride.
No, the cab driver.
I think I might have.
I'm sure you have, Pocket, and that's a story we'll have to get to on a later episode. Okay, so very quickly, because time is running down with this episode, and there's so much we haven't gotten to, Ezra, I hope you'll come back and talk about part 2 being on the experience of actually being on the base. But I want to leave with one question for this session. How did it feel to put on the uniform for the first time?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because I have a ridiculous story about that. There are actually different uniforms that are worn, right? It's called the PT uniform for exercise, which is a t-shirt and shorts with the official Air Force logo.
Cool.
And it also has like a windbreaker that goes with it, like a light jacket and sort of light sweatpants that you put on if it's like colder out. But and you don't really need those in Alabama in the summer outdoors. Indoors you do because the air conditioning is like blasting. But and then there's everyone thinks of the military uniform, that camouflage. We call it OCP uniform. And then there's the more formal, we call blues in the Air Force. Looks like a blue suit, kind of like a dark blue suit. That's like the formal uniform you wear at ceremonies. There's an even fancier one than that called mess dress.
Oh wow! I had no idea so many uniforms.
First couple of days there, because of coronavirus, I was quarantined in my room. Right, I only interacted with my roommate the first couple of days. Except sometimes we went out to get fresh air. Something that basically you're in your room and you're only supposed to wear the PT uniform, the t-shirt and shorts.
Okay.
And as coronavirus test came back negative, we were like leaving quarantine a bit. Then they wanted us to put on the typical day-to-day work uniform, which is the camo uniform. So I always dreamed it's going to feel special the way Pocket is like intimating. But this is training. They're kind of messing with you. That's part of, it's like a game kind of, how they want to see how you react to certain stresses. So wake up's 4:30. You got to be standing outside by like 4:31, 4:32. So you sleep in that t-shirt and shorts. So you're already in a uniform, right? That you can stay out in the halls. They make sure you're there because it's coronavirus. They take your temperature. And then they say, okay, you're dismissed to your dorms. Go do personal hygiene, right? You have to shave every day if you're a male. You have to make your bed. Go do all that stuff. And then afterwards, you're going to go exercise and breakfast. So one day, they didn't tell us the next day you're going to put on your camo uniform. Instead, we wake up, we're in our t-shirt and shorts. We get out in the hall and had a staff member see that we're all there, like do the roll call, dismiss us to our rooms, and then say, by the way, today you're wearing the camo uniforms. Go get them on. You don't have any extra time for it. So, of the 16 of us in my small group called the Flight, we're pretty evenly divided between prior service, like people who maybe were enlisted and got promoted, and non-priors. So Commander said, if you're a prior, help the non-priors figure out how to do it. So my roommate was a master sergeant. I basically depended on him to, show me how to put it on properly. And so it felt very rushed, not at all what I had dreamed of.
You got a really cool story out of it, though.
Yeah, I did. And at some later date, it hit me looking at the flag on my shoulder, Still the uniform,
Yeah.
That is so inspiring, and honestly, I can't believe how fast the time went on this part. Ezra, will you come back for a part 2 and tell us about what it's like to be yelled at by a drill sergeant? I can't even imagine the camaraderie you would form with your classmates. Will you come back and finish up the story in a future episode?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Pocket, anything to say?
I'm surprised.
Look what we're listening to. People doing amazing things.
No, I mean, there's just so much. I'm just learning. I didn't even know, Air Force were called airmen, and if that is true, there's also, God. I'm just spacing out right now too, because my head is.
Yeah, I know. There. Information overload. We'll digress. We'll talk it out on a later episode. I want to thank Ezra Frazer for teasing our appetites. If any of the listeners have any questions for Ezra, email us, tweet us, say something to us, and we're going to be cut off any second. So this is Ocho Goldberg saying goodbye. Thanks to Ezra Pocket. Until next time.